Can I ask the committee to agree the minutes of the previous meeting?
Chair, sorry, before we agree, may I say a couple of items relating to these minutes, or specifically to minute number 3319, in connection with updates to the financial regulations, which I think we should consider. I'm not actually I'm not questioning the accuracy of the minute as a record of what transpired, and I've been back to the recording of the meeting, and in as much as the appalling sound quality of the recording allows, I'm satisfied that the minutes reflect what transpired. The first point I'd like to raise is around the clarity of what was agreed. I and those colleagues that I've spoken to about the delegation of powers to amend car parking fees took this to mean that the Section 151 officer would have powers to make limited tactical changes to fees during the year. Some of my colleagues not on this committee have subsequently read the minute carefully and questioned if what was agreed actually limits changes to small-scale tactical adjustments. The main reason why we need clarity relates to the Constitution. The document, last updated in July 2019, states very clearly in section I-10(2) of the Delegation of Authority that the setting of off-street car parking charges is reserved for council. And I believe it's not within our remit as a committee to change the Constitution or to recommend to the council a change in the Constitution. We can recommend to the Standards Committee that we think it's appropriate for a change to be made into the Constitution. And if that committee is so minded, it can then recommend the change in delegation to council. So as things stand, I believe that although the minute under discussion is an accurate record of the meeting, it has recommended to council something that is not adequately clear and something which this committee does not have the authority to recommend directly to council. So, Mr. Chairman, I suggest that Democratic Services be asked to provide guidance to this committee as to how this matter should be handled, because what we have done has circumvented the Constitution and the Standards Committee. I'm prepared to confirm the minutes of the meeting as an accurate record of what transpired. However, I would request that the minute for this confirmation notes that that previous meeting failed to recognise that its proposed changes to the setting of car parking fees would require an amendment to section I-10 of the Constitution, and that the car parking part covered by minute 3319 should have been a recommendation to the Standards Committee to consider prior to going to council. The note should also set out that Democratic Services are to be asked how to rectify the situation. That's my take on it. I believe I've got colleagues who would also like to comment on this situation.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I go along with what's just been said to a great extent. The minute does largely reflect the expression of the committee at last meeting in literal terms, but I would like the minutes actually clarified to express what I regarded as the intention of the committee, which was that alterations would be delegated to the executive and the 151 officer during the year, i.e. sort of minor housekeeping changes, which I think are perfectly reasonably delegated during the year. I don't think we need to come back to full committee every time we want to squeeze the commuters for an extra few pence at a car park or something like that. I think we were right in giving them the flexibility that they asked for minor adjustments. But car parking charges are the second largest source of revenue we extract from our taxpayers and our residents. And the notion that during the year proviso or provision has been misinterpreted by the administration to mean that they can deny the council say on such an important aspect of the council's activity seems to be wrong, and I would like a clarification of the intention expressed by the meeting that generated the last minute. Thanks very much.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to confirm my own agreement with both of my fellow councillors. Thank you.
Yes, Chair. I haven't got the minute in front of me here, but I believed that when we discussed it last time, then it was clear that we were looking at some potential fairly major changes to the parking charges as a result of the strategic review which is underway. I didn't get the feeling that it was going to be housekeeping or minor adjustments. As to the matter about the constitutional position, then I don't think. I understand what Councillor Seaborn has said may make sense, but without papers in front of me and a copy of the Constitution and everything else, I don't think tonight we can just decide that what we did last time was non-constitutional. I wouldn't object to asking for this to be brought back with appropriate papers so we could see what we should do next time. But I couldn't agree with the proposal of Councillor Seaborn because we don't have the information to hand to be able to revise the minutes on that basis.
So Chairman, obviously I wasn't expecting that point to be made. Didn't see it on the agenda, so haven't managed to sort of rehearse anything along those lines. I think the first comment that Councillor Seaborn made was about asking Democratic Services to look into the detail. I think we can absolutely do that and support that. And Councillor Coles just suggested that we bring that back to the next meeting, if that's okay with yourself, Chairman, and your members on the committee. That's probably all I can say, actually, because I haven't looked back at any of that in advance of this meeting.
Thank you, Graham.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Is that on?
Thank you, Chairman. Just as I can't comment on the minutes because I didn't attend that meeting, but just as a point of information on one of the things that was said, while it was being said, I was having a look at the Constitution, and it notes within the financial regulations, which are part of the Constitution, the Audit Committee reports to full council. It's responsible for overview of financial regulations and proposing amendment to full council. So the Audit Committee in this council, and in fact in any council, is a creature of council. So it doesn't report through the Standards Committee. And that would be commonplace in councils.
Thank you. Yes.
I think it would be inappropriate to amend the minutes. I don't think that's the right way to do it. The minutes are correct. If you want to make raise an issue for subsequent examination by this committee, that would be fine. And I would be quite happy to see the results of the council's view as to the officers' views as to whether we've been acting constitutionally or unconstitutionally. But we should put that down as possibly a item for discussion and for feedback at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in response to Councillor Cole's comments, it was proposed that the Section 15 officer be able to approve changes to fees and charges, including car parking fees, to speed up the process and give flexibility to change charges during the year. That's to my mind, the essential qualification in the difference in meaning. If it was simply to change charges, full stop, there would be no ambiguity. But the qualification of change charges during the year to respond to market demand says to me pretty unequivocally that that's a bit of housekeeping, a bit of post-event adjustment, if you like, rather than the establishment of the principal car parking charges for the years themselves. It's that expression that qualifies the absolute right, if you see what I mean. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it looks like then we should bring this item back to the next meeting for discussion. Is that agreed? Thank you. So we can confirm the minutes of the last meeting then are correct. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item 2, apologies for absence.
Received apologies from absence from Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Disclosure of interests.
I've had none submitted prior to the meeting.
Thank you. Item 4, questions by members of the public. Have we had any?
None, Chair.
No, thank you. Questions from members?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, the air quality management investigation outcome findings. I think, Tom, you were going to brief us on this.
Chairman, thank you. Thank you for a moment I've prepared some words that I'd like to go through, please. The committee has before it the full report of the independent auditor's investigation into air quality management at Waverley Borough Council. While I'm not pleased that this case happened, I'm pleased that we can now publish this report after 2 years of it being part of a criminal case which concluded in December. The 1st of August 2017 sticks in my mind for 2 reasons. Firstly, it was the day I started at Waverley Borough Council as interim managing director. Secondly, I received an email from David Harvey, who runs ADM Limited, a Farnham-based company providing expert professional services in air quality assessment and management. Mr. Harvey had some serious concerns about errors in the 2016 air quality status report. As a result of his email, we commissioned 2 independent reports on the data itself and on how these errors occurred. The latter is in your papers this evening. I'd like to take this opportunity of formally recording my and the Council's thanks to Mr. Harvey for raising the issue in the first place and for his constructive support in subsequent meetings and conversations. His intervention was crucial. As the audit report of January 2018 indicated to us that the reporting problems were due to the willful activity of a former employee, we referred the matter to Surrey Police and requested an investigation. That process concluded with a guilty plea by that individual, conviction, and then sentencing on the 12th of December 2019. The independent investigation and the court hearings recognised that the fraud in relation to air quality figures was due to the actions of one individual. Nevertheless, I would like to apologise to the committee and to the community for the gaps in process and oversight that enabled it to happen undetected for so long, until Mr. Harvey's intervention and our response in August 2017. I'm sorry for that, for the lack of reliable data, and for the expense and anxiety caused by the whole episode. The Audit Committee and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committees have received reports throughout this time. The chairs and vice chairs of those committees and members of the executive were also briefed internally on the legal processes. All supported the actions we were taking without hesitation. My colleagues, Ms. Wrighton and Mr. Homewood, will be able to talk about the corrections to process and oversight that were implemented once we uncovered these problems. It is these strengthened governance arrangements that are the focus of the recommendation to the committee tonight. I hope you will see that the Council has dealt with this situation very seriously since it emerged, and that our new regime of air quality reporting provides sound data to inform the current important discussions on air quality. So I thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to add my reflections on how we got to this point.
Thank you. Is there to be another discussion or presentation? And are you going to say something on this?
There's nothing further that I want to add to the report, which outlines how we got to where we are following the initial investigations. But obviously, Richard and I are happy to take questions on the governance arrangements we've put in place since, particularly.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, this is something which I know a little bit about, as I was included in very much in the loop when this was going on. I'd brought forward air quality onto the agenda at the beginning of 2017, and as this unfolded, I was working with Mr. Harvey to try and get the information, and when it came through, we pressed it, and it's and actually, one thing we weren't told was on the very day of our NVOS meeting on the 18th of September. That was the day that the member of staff was suspended, but we weren't told that. If I can refer you to the to the report on page 12. Page 8, which is the officer report. It tells us at paragraph 4.5 that the circumstances are extremely unusual. The fictitious results did not show any trend. So this was not a fiddling by the officer to try and improve or worsen the figures that were being reported. It was obviously for other reasons. 5.1 is very important, that paragraph. It says that we as an authority sustains a sense of responsibility for the environment, promoting biodiversity and protecting our planet. We are also committed to taking action on air quality issues. And very much of the air quality officer's job, I think about 30% is monitoring, much of the rest of that of the job is to try and get action through the air quality action plan to improve and to also, obviously, of course, to respond to planning applications and that sort of thing is another part of that role. If I can move on to page 13, to the actual report itself, at paragraph 3.4, the bottom right-hand corner of those pages, you'll see that there are some redacted parts where the auditor, we'll call her, says that as part of the investigation we interviewed the following people. Those names are actually a matter of public record anyway, so I see no reason for having removed and redacted them. But what it doesn't say in there is that also councillors were interviewed as part of that process. I don't know who else apart from myself was, but I had a visit myself at home from the auditor, and I spent about an hour going through the background of this, of which obviously I was aware with a lot of many years of having scrutinised Waverley from outside of the council before being a councillor, and I in particular passed over some information which is absolutely vital to the background of this, which is a legal notice given by Waverley Borough Council to Crest Nicholson, written on the 29th of November 2010, based on information provided by the air quality officer at the time. This isn't the air quality officer who was subject of the report in front of you, but the previous air quality officer had put in a legal notice, effectively, Regulation 19 notice, which effectively says to the developer, we cannot grant consent lawfully because your EIA is incomplete, so you have to provide the following information. And what she said was, there is a lack of clarity, I'm quoting directly, and the chairman has got a copy of this in front of him. It says, there's a lack of clarity in respect of the effect of the phasing of the Royal Deer traffic lights. There's no modelling of how this junction would operate, and the in-combination effects of the two proposals hasn't been assessed. And that she went on, the request, which was actually from the council's lawyer and signed by the head of planning, said that the council requests the following matters should be submitted because there was insufficient information, and that said, clarify the effect of the changes to the Royal Deer traffic light phasing and the effect that this and the A31 works will have on air traffic flow and air quality. So that's quite clear. The air quality officer had identified that Crest Nicholson had not, even though their transport assessment said that they had used parametric modelling and had assessed the impacts. She was aware, as I was, that and had checked that it wasn't, and that actually the report had been falsified, as had the EIA, and her request was never satisfied. She asked again in 2012 and then left the council shortly after the East Street scheme was reconsented against her will. So, the background of this, as far as I'm concerned, it's a matter of governance. This is coming forward. There's a lot of hoo-ha at the moment in Farnham because of the roadworks that will ensue from this. And with this sort of background to this report that's in front of us, I don't think it would be suitable for this or any, I mean, certainly not with Farnham residents on it, but any administration to say, right, that matter is closed, because, I brought this up with the auditor, I brought it up with the police, it has not been investigated, it obviously has to be in the circumstances. There are other issues within the report. So I would very much like this committee in its comments to make it clear that there are issues that they are unaware of and that should be followed up. And that it should be done immediately, and perhaps the chairman would take this up with the leader as a matter of immediacy. There is just one other little issue, I'm not concerned with the redactions. I've been through them and seen that most of them are to do with employment issues and that sort of thing, so the public can be assured that actually there isn't really much they're not being told. This is a very open report, and I thank the officers for it, because it is a good report. You know, not absolutely complete, but that's because the report did not cover those issues. It was not within the remit. Obviously it should be. But there is just one bit. Where did I note it? The 3.7, paragraph 3.7, whereabouts is that? It's exempt, I think. Yes, there's a middle bit of that which is exempt, which you members can find. You'll see it's the sort of first 15 words or so of the second sentence, and you can find that. You can see it there. That is exempt, so you can't refer to it. Right, because if you turn to the same paragraph on page 27, you'll see it's blanked out in the public's copy. But you can see that it does say, beginning with the word firstly, and up to where it says secondly, that is exempt information. I do believe that, you know, without necessarily going into exempt to discuss it, which you members of the committee might or might not wish to do.
So, Councillor Hyman, I'm sorry, I need to stop you here. You've had
yes, just that you may wish to know about that and may wish to ask, because I think that's another thing you may wish to know about before you make your determination on this report. And I thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, I mean, it's before my time on the council, but it seems a very strange sort of set of circumstances. There was, as far as I can see, there was no motive ascribed to the activities of the individual, no personal or related party financial enrichment or whatever. And I think, along with others, may still struggle to understand the reasoning behind all this. But I see in our papers that there are we are being asked to strengthen the controls around the way it is produced by the council and provide 2 separate air quality contracts, etc. Seems to me the best way is to have at least 2 companies doing different checks on different sites as part of their services. But do any of the officers present have any more information on the detail of how the improvement in process is going to be achieved, please?
If I can, Chair, just to elaborate on that a bit, clearly the issue was that one person was left to deal with all of this, and that clearly isn't acceptable and couldn't continue, and the audit report highlights that fact. So very quickly we did introduce 2 separate contracts, one for managing the diffusion tubes, which was the crux of this matter, that the tubes weren't being changed, and we appointed a contractor to do that independently of the council and independently of the council officers. We then appointed another contractor to manage our automatic air quality analysers, one in Farnham and one in Godalming. And very quickly after that, we also then began to publish the monthly results on our website as we received them each month. Although it was raw data and not adjusted data, we thought it was more important to be open and put it in the public domain as we received it each month, which was another reassurance that it was being done. We also then began to publish our air quality analyser data on the website, and we linked up with Air Quality England's website, where you can almost see live data from the automatic analysers now. So again, reassurance for the public and for the councillors and the council that everything was being done properly. One of those companies, Ricardo AE, also does the quality assurance checks to make sure everything is being done properly, that the machines are functioning properly, etc. And then every month now, I get a checklist from the officers in that team, confirming all the actions that have been done each month to make sure that everything's being done properly. So some much tighter controls and governance arrangements over air quality monitoring now, which will provide everybody with reassurance, and it's in the public domain as we receive it as well. So I don't think we can go much further now in being open in the public domain, and with the governance arrangements and the checks we've got in place now, this certainly can't happen again.
The only thing I would go back to the point I was making, I mean, it might be belt and braces, but what about a sort of cross-checking of each other's activity? You know, the companies work on different sites rather than leaving one company to deal with a fixed set of locations and another company to deal with another fixed set of locations. A cross-check would be I'd say it might be belt and braces, and it might not be sufficient. It might be, achieve the objective, but it's something that seems to be possible.
Sorry, Chair. I did say that Ricardo AEA, who manage the automatic analysers, they do the quality assurance checks on the diffusion tube results. So the consultants are checking each other, if you like. Yeah.
Thanks very much. That's very, very reassuring. Do you think there's any other areas where one person only is responsible for such a significant or a similar significant piece of work where it could potentially happen again?
Thank you, Chair. In respect of my responsibilities within the council, I can't think of anything else where it's left to one person to manage it.
And more widely?
Don't want to make a comment generally, because one of the functions of internal audit is to look at controls, look at segregation of duties, and one of the fundamentals in the audit coverage is to look at whether there is a segregation, and within our control framework, not just across financial areas, but much wider than that, across our systems, we always try to ensure that we've got at least one person involved in a process, particularly where there's a payment or a key function. I couldn't sit here and say that we've nailed absolutely every single process so that we've got full coverage, but I think the work that this committee does, the work that Gail's audit function does, helps to eliminate the risk that one member of staff is able to complete a function that puts the council at risk. As I say, we might not have everything completely locked down. I would really hope that we would never have a repeat of the matter in hand. And but as the audits identify risk, the auditors and Gail liaise with service heads and the managers, and talk constantly throughout the year talk about strengthening controls in the light of risks that have come to light during the audit. I'm not aware, and Gail can confirm one way or the other, whether we've not aware of any major gaps that we found in audits recently. I don't believe we have in terms of segregation, so hopefully we're pretty strong in that respect.
One thing I noticed in the report, one of the reasons or possible reasons for the employee doing this is because they were in secondary employment. And I think it said quite clearly that they were working early in the morning. I wonder if we tightened up or are able to tighten up on secondary employment by council employees.
We would have to go into exempt to discuss that, but we're not aware of it actually being an issue. It's a bit of a red herring in this report.
Well, it still concerns me because obviously it is something that could affect somebody's efficiency.
So just to avoid going into exempt for now, are we still at open session? Thank you. Just on the general point about secondary employment, as employees do have to seek permission to undertake secondary paid employment.
Yeah, my understanding was this was the case then and the employee didn't tell you. I wondered if there was a way we could tighten up on that.
So again, without talking about the specifics of this case, if somebody chose to do it and we weren't aware of it, it would be quite difficult to tighten up on it because we wouldn't be aware of it. Nevertheless, if somebody breaches any type of policy, there are sanctions in place for dealing with that as and when we do find out.
Thank you, Chairman. I was intending to bring up the point that Councillor Floyd Douglas brought up. I'd like to just go a stage further on that one. I really feel that the findings of this report, which are on page 12 of the exempt papers and the final page of the public domain papers. It sets out some recommendations and learnings, and officers didn't really, with their hands on their hearts, give us definitive answers that these have been addressed in other parts of the organisation. We must have to do a lot of external reporting, health and safety statistics to the Health and Safety Executive, safeguarding statistics to Surrey, a lot of financial reporting. I would rather like this committee to ask either internal audit to come back with a report addressing all aspects of operations that could be exposed to these issues, or perhaps the directors to go through their areas of responsibility and come back to us and give us that assurance that the lessons have been captured. Because I'm really pleased to see the report on the air quality. I think I was Vice Chairman of Audit at the time this was going through. I can assure colleagues that key players were all kept well advised of what was going on. I think it's a very good piece of work in as far as it goes, but it does have applicability to a much wider set of things that this council does. And expanding on that, the question of misuse of expenses for site visits was covered in the report. That is surely something that happens on a widespread, sorry, not the misuse. We have officers regularly visiting sites in order to verify that activities are happening. It would be good for this committee to have assurance that whatever lessons were learnt about the fraudulent use of expenses in that circumstances have been tightened up so that it's not happening elsewhere. I'm sure our officers are absolutely honest, but we have a responsibility. It's our residents' money that we're looking after, so we need to be assured that there are adequate controls in place to prevent a recurrence of that. So I'd welcome comments of colleagues on this, but I'd certainly very much like for this committee to consider asking for assurance on those aspects so that we are assured that not just air quality has been addressed here, but the wider learnings and its applicability to the organisation have been addressed. Thank you, Chairman.
So, Chairman, on those 2 points, I think later on the agenda we're looking at Gail's internal audit plan. Certainly the point raised about data that's provided to external organisations needs validation. We can register that as an item to go into the audit plan for the coming year. With regards to staff expense claims, Gail's just confirmed we look at that routinely every 2 years. That was looked at last year. I think, again, if the Audit Committee wanted to increase the frequency, and I'm certainly not aware of an underlying issue here. I think it was an isolated case that was investigated, but that's for, the Audit Committee can make those observations when we look at the audit plan later on. And I think if you wanted something, the frequency of that particular audit increased, then we could look at that. Chairman?
Sorry, it's recommended that the strengthened governance arrangements are considered and endorsed by this committee. They endorsed. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Item 7, the external audit plan, and could I ask Mark Bartlett from Grant Thornton to present this?
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly to introduce myself. So I'm Mark Bartlett. I'm an audit manager of Grant Thornton. My background in public sector audit stretches back nearly 20 years now. And I've been with Grant Thornton since 2012 when I transferred across from the Audit Commission. So I've taken over from Laura Lynn as the manager on the audit. So you've got before you today our external audit plan for the 1920 audit year. If I could take you first to page 3 of the report, which is page 40 of your papers, and that just takes you through this is the introduction headlines page. So just quickly setting out the scope of the audit. So there's the two key elements to it. So we need to, we look at the authority and group financial statements to provide an opinion on those, and also we look at your value for money arrangements for securing economy, efficiency and effectiveness in your use of resources. So we've got some of the main headlines are set out at the bottom of the page there. So we've got significant risks highlighted there. So I think they're pretty much in line with what we had last year. Management override the controls. Then the two key areas of estimation within the accounts, the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of the net pension fund liability. Materiality has been set at 1.9 million, so it's comparable to the prior year, because obviously we don't audit to the nearest pound, otherwise we'd be sat with your team all year round. Then on the value for money arrangements, we've identified two significant risks there. One looking at financial sustainability, which is a VFM risk that I think we would see on every single local government audit plan, given the state of local government finances generally. And we've also got an additional one looking at the commercial property portfolio, given some of the activity that the council's moving into. In terms of the logistics of the audit, we've done some part of our interim audit. The balance of that is taking place in March, and then our final accounts visit is scheduled to take place in June and July. The audit findings report will then be coming to your meeting in July, and we can confirm there's no independence issues. As you're aware, the audit has been delivered by a team outside of the London office. Page 41 then just sets out some of the, I guess, the wider factors that have been considered when looking at the audit planning. So looking at the wider economy and political position, the financial reporting and audit, the raising of the bar by the Financial Reporting Council, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail shortly. And also then picking up on one of the main changes coming through in the accounts, that's the implementation of IFRS 16 on leases. I won't go through page by page, I'll just pick out some of the key points. So just a bit more detail on the significant risks on pages 43 and 44 of your pack. So we've got there's two risks under the ISAs that we're required to consider. The first one is that the revenue cycle includes fraudulent transactions. We're happy that that's not a risk for Waverley Borough Council, and that's been rebutted. The second presumed risk under the ISAs that management might override the controls. It's not possible to rebut that, and we've set out on the right-hand side there the work that we'll be doing to address that risk. So we'll be looking at the effectiveness of controls. We'll do a lot of work around journals, which is one of the key ways that manipulation of the accounts could occur, and we'll also concentrate on all the key areas of estimation and management judgment. The other significant risks are on page 44 and 45, and these are the two big figures within the accounts, really. So one is the valuation of land and buildings, and this is pretty much in line, as I said, with last year. So we've set out on the right-hand side the work that we intend to do in relation to that. And likewise on page 45, the valuation of the pension fund net liability. The one other risk identified on page 46 is the introduction of IFRS 16, and we'll be looking at the work that the authority's done in relation to that. It's probably just worth noting that this isn't something that directly impacts that the council have to account for in this year. It comes in full in next financial year, but the council does have to disclose what they think the impact of the standard will be within this year's accounts. Page 47 then just sets out some of the other areas of our responsibilities that we will be covering during the audit. So that's things like covering the narrative reports, the annual governance statement, the duties under the Local Audit and Accountability Act in terms of electors having the right to ask questions and raise objections, etc. Page 48 then just sets out in a bit more detail how we've arrived at the materiality that we'll be working to within the audit of 1.9 million. And then the rest of the report then picks up on page 49, the value for money work. So this is the other part of our our work, the scope is set out by the National Audit Office, so it's unchanged from last year. You may be aware that there has been a consultation and the value for money work is going to change going forward, but we're still under the same code as in 1819 at the moment. So the triangle there sets out the three sub-criteria that we're looking at. So informed decision-making, sustainable resource deployment, and working with partners and other third parties. And I mentioned the two significant VFM risks that we've identified, and we've got a bit more detail set out there. So financial sustainability, so we'll really be focusing on the authority's latest medium-term financial plan, the budget, and considering the supporting information and the assumptions that underpin all the figures within that work. The second VFM risk, as I mentioned, is the commercial portfolio property. A paper went through recently where the authority are looking to invest beyond the current local enterprise partnership area. So we'll be having a look at the arrangements that are being put in place to safeguard the council in those circumstances. Page 9 just sets out then a bit of logistics, what you can expect from us throughout the year. And then section 10 on page 51 picks up on the audit fees. So you will be aware from the reports last year that there were some fee variations that are still going through the final stages, I believe, of approval by PSAA. And we've now set out there the proposed fees for the 1920 audit. So I think there's been some discussion in some of the previous meetings about the raising of the bar and the additional work that's now being carried out compared to when all of the audit firms, including Grant Thornton, were bidding for the work back in 2016. And we've set out on page 52 in a bit more detail the additional fees and what they relate to for 2019-20 financial year. This, as with all fee variations, is subject to the approval of PSAA. So there have been communications to all of our clients, and PSAA are aware that these communications have come out, and this will go through their approval process in due course. We have attached as an appendix a letter that the engagement lead John Roberts sent to Graham last month that gives a bit more of the background and detail behind these fees. I wasn't planning to go through that now, but happy to take any questions on that. I think the only other point I was just going to pick up on is on page 53. So this is looking at firstly confirming our independence and also any non-audit services. So this is the grants work in respect of housing benefits and the housing capital receipts grant, and also the independent examinations. So we set out the proposed fees for that work there. Happy to take questions from members. I appreciate that was a bit of a quick canter through the audit plan.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, no. Sorry, no. I just asked you to chair, if I may. Is that a problem? No, I don't know. I'm just asking a question. Oh, I thought we could just speak as we were. We're not in council, are we? Sorry. Matt?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, if I can refer you to page 43, which is section 4, significant risks identified. And it does include things which are very sensible. My concern is what it doesn't include, very significant risks to this council, one of which I have already covered. People don't seem to be particularly concerned about it, but I know for a fact that residents are concerned about it, which is the falsification of the transport assessment for the £110 million scheme that's being built in Farnham, which the Air Quality Officer identified in 2010. And I think that's something that has to be taken seriously, and the public would be very worried if they didn't see it taken seriously now that we have an administration who is not connected in any way to what went on back there. And I should say that no one in this room, as far as I know, was here at the time. No one apart from myself was around at the time, so I'm not making any comment with regard to the members and officers who are present in the room today. This is just a matter of fact of things that need to be cleared up because of what's all the roadworks that are coming forward later on in the year, and the likely effects of that, which have not been assessed at any point. So that needs to be taken forward, and that there is an enormous risk to Farnham. There is an enormous risk also to the council, and certainly its reputation in that. That needs to be addressed. I have raised this without it being addressed properly at the Audit Committee over the past years, myself when I was a member. The other issue, of course, is the failure to respect the European Court of Justice ruling, People Over Wind, April 2018, which has also been summarised in last summer's National Planning Policy Guidance, and which we have to abide by law. We don't have an option. It's our duty as members and the council. This is costing us hundreds of thousands of pounds in appeal costs unnecessarily, the fact that we're not implementing that properly. The council's position is simply based on a false assumption that an assessment of the mitigation is in an assessment for Local Plan Part 1. Of course it isn't. Check for yourselves. I can't prove to you it's not there without you actually looking and seeing that it's not there. But I can, obviously, I think it's very simple for anyone to realise that if there were an assessment in there, Waverley would not have put in place a moratorium after the Sweetman People Over Wind judgment came out. There would have been no reason for Waverley to put in place that moratorium. So, as I have said before, the law requires us to put that moratorium in place. So this is a matter of legal process, a serious issue of failure of governance, and I expect this committee to take that forward immediately. Otherwise, other action will have to be taken, and it would not look good for us if we were not acting upon the information that we have on this. So, Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak on the matter. I do ask that when you come to making your comments, and you would certainly ask for it to be minuted, as I do, of these two major issues, which members of the public would consider to be fraud. I mean, we are selling mitigation, which does not satisfy the law. We're selling mitigation to developers, and that should stop immediately until Natural England have been forced to provide the necessary assessments. And it's a process matter. It's very simple. That's what they've got to do. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. The inevitable question, where does the coronavirus sit in this in terms of our risks? Will it sit on something like something to do with health, or should it, because it's potential to be a major risk, sit more somewhere else?
I think I'd probably sit somewhere else other than... I suppose it's something we'd be looking at in the same way as there's some comments on the Brexit position on page 41 there, in terms of ensuring that the council are taking appropriate actions in relation to the things that come up. But primarily the audit plan is focusing on the risks to the audit of the financial statements.
It's a very good point about other risks, so non-financial risks, and so part of the work of this committee, with Peter's support, is to look at strategic risks, and so outside of sort of Mark's and Grant Thornton's remit of looking at misstatement of accounts risk, yeah, we are very much concerned with other risks that can affect the operation of this council and the achievement of its objectives, and you've just cited a very current one there, and so anything that can blow us off course, incur costs or reputational damage, but certainly in terms of operational issues like viruses, etc., like flooding, like adverse weather, we're very much aware of those, and our heads of service with Peter and the team's support look at the risks on a strategic and an operational basis, and that whether the mitigation is correct and sufficient that's in place. And the committee get involved in that at a couple of points in the year, actually. And Peter, I'm not sure when you're planning your next session with the committee on looking at risk, but you did have one fairly recently, I believe, didn't you? Didn't you get Zurich? Did Zurich come in? Do you want to pop your mic on?
We had Zurich in for an hour seminar before the last audit committee, and you'll get sight of some detail on the strategic risk register at the next audit meeting.
Of pursuing the discussion, if I may, what has Grant Thornton had in terms of its experience from other councils as to external risks which might affect things like our income streams?
I'm sorry, can you just clarify the question?
Well, my question is, what experience have you had, or feedback you've had from your other council you deal with, as to the external risks which might affect, for example, our income streams?
I mean, I think one of the very current topics at the moment is one that we've got on the value for money conclusion. So around the property portfolio. So there's a lot of interest. Generally, the National Audit Office have released a report in the last couple of weeks on that. So there's in particular interest in shopping centres. So the number of councils that have invested significant amounts in shopping centres and have committed quite heavily into that area, and the level of exposure that they might be facing from there. So that's one of the reasons we've picked it up as a VFM risk here. Although we were aware that that's not the direction that the council was looking to go, we felt it was prudent to have a closer look at the arrangements the council is putting in place, because as so many councils are moving into the commercial property market, it does leave themselves open to the volatility that market can bring.
I'm inclined to agree with you, and maybe a long time ago, but it's the reason why, to my memory, the Japanese economy went somewhat belly-shaped.
Mark, that's a question on the similar subject, really, the property valuations. What you do is provide a valuation as of now, as of the date of the audit. Do you, when you look at the risk of that property investment, do you look at the future movement or trend in valuation? You know, when financial organisations do their forward projections, valuing all sorts of assets with property and investments, you know, that gives you a measure of the uncertainty or the risk involved in that investment. Do you take that sort of future projection on board?
Yes, that is one of the things we'll be looking at as part of that. So I think the level of detail we've got set out within the risk here. So we haven't got it particularly set out here, but one of the things we'll be looking at is what sort of sensitivity analysis is being carried out around looking at what sort of impact changes one way or the other could have to the overall portfolio, what diversity of the portfolio there is, how is the council really limiting its potential exposure there.
Thank you, Chairman. 3 comments, one relating to clarity, one relating to a change from last year's plan, and the third one just a commendation. So you've mentioned financial sustainability as a value for money risk. Is that what you really mean? Because it's sort of kind of ambiguous to me. I mean, the financial sustainability of the council is probably not in question. We've got a revenue stream. It's the operation, it's our service areas that are under threat. Is that what you mean?
Yes, so when we're looking at financial sustainability, we're looking at how robust the arrangements are in terms of the budget setting, the medium-term financial planning, where there are gaps looking forward in terms of the council being able to set a balanced budget over the medium term. What level of planning is taking place to ensure those gaps are being addressed? So financial sustainability is being used as a kind of catch-all term across a lot of our clients, I guess. But that's what we're really looking at is with the reductions in funding that are coming centrally, what is the council doing to ensure that it can set a balanced budget? How is it reviewing its service provision? Is it looking at changing its its revenue sources, i.e. commercial property investment? Is it looking at different ways it can deliver its services? Is it looking at whether it even continues to deliver some services? I mean, different councils are at different stages of that process in terms of having to make the hard decisions. I'm not saying Waverley's at that point, but it's assessing how the council is moving to address those risks going forward.
Right. So what you've said is what I would expect to hear, but that's not actually what's written down here. It uses the word financial sustainability when actually there's a significant issue that you addressed of service sustainability. I just wondered whether a few more words could be added to this. You've mentioned, you will be looking at that. I'd actually like to see it written down somewhere that we're linking the financial sustainability to our ability to carry on providing services. Okay, the two are interlinked, and we've just got one aspect covered in the words.
Sure. We can make sure that the narrative, what you'll have in the audit findings report that comes back on this, will set out in more detail the work that's been carried out to arrive at our conclusions, and I can assure you that will cover what we've looked at in that respect.
Good. Okay, thank you. Second point I had was just on page 4 of the plan, you've removed from last year under our response the statement, "We will keep you informed of changes to the financial reporting requirements for the year through ongoing discussions and invitations to our technical update workshops." That was in last year. It was a nice thing to have in last year. I don't know whether our officers might like to comment about, would they like to see that again? Because I think it would be beneficial, but maybe there's a reason for not having it in. I'll just say the third point, and then you can address the second part. The third one is just welcoming the inclusion of the other risks, because the significant risks, it's a bit of a sausage factory. It's essentially the same risks as last year. They're the big high-level things. That's great, but actually covering the 1 year risks, specific things, is I think that's great. So welcome addition. So if you'd like to address the other point, thank you.
Yes, of course. So I think the honest answer is it probably wasn't within the templated wording this year, so it didn't get in there. But I can assure you that we have regular meetings with Graham and his finance staff. So we do have discussions about any upcoming changes. I think Rosie will confirm that we've been discussing IFRS 16, etc. And I think we did have attendees from Waverley at the local accounts workshops. So the accounts workshops have been taking place over the course of the last month across the country. So while the report doesn't make reference to it, I can assure you those have gone ahead and Waverley staff have been invited.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are all aware as members that this administration is cutting £700,000 out of the amount of money it spends on various things, various services. We have sat through, as committee members, long presentations about risk management and all the rest of it. And I don't know if this is a topic for Gale or external audit or whatever, but there clearly are implications of cutting to that extent. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I mean, the council is under an obligation to provide a balanced budget, but there are clearly, to my mind, risks of not doing £700,000 worth of stuff we are doing now. And I would like to see some risk assessment attached to each of the savings that the council is preparing to carry out. Not, as I say, in order to stop it going ahead, but in order to be able to manage the consequences of that sort of cutback. Thanks.
Chairman, I think that's for us to do internally. It's a good point, and I think I recognised and I recorded in the budget report to council 2 weeks ago under my robustness of budget section that there are challenges within the budget. Property is one of them. We've spoken about that just now, and as Councillor Deere rightly says, there's a savings programme, and whilst we've quizzed the heads of service throughout the the process building up to the committee about the deliverability of that. It's quite a big proportion of our annual budget, and I mean, I'm confident actually with the delivery of that because of the challenge that we gave to heads of service. But looking at the overall context of the budget, we've also got some of the business transformation running alongside on top of that. So I think it's that sort of cumulative impact of a number of different savings programs on top of those cuts that give us some risk in our budget. It isn't a risk-free budget. It's going to need some very close monitoring. It's going to need some strong leadership to deliver. And I'm sure the Value for Money O&S committee will track through the monitoring reports and increase that frequency if they feel there's a need to during the year to make sure we stay on track. And certainly at management board level, Tom, Annie and myself have already said to Rosie, Peter and the team that we want more frequent, more detailed monitoring reports for that very reason, because it's going to be a challenge to stay on track next financial year. But that, those are the times that we're living in, and I think we've got the ability in the staff team, but there are some things in there like the property targets that will be even more challenging actually than delivering those savings targets. But we're going to do our best on all of them. So I don't really know whether there is an audit aspect specifically. I think it's probably internal actually. It's for us to make sure we've got our house fully in order, ready to deliver that budget next year.
I think it probably is internal. I agree with you, but the point I'm making is that as the heads of service make the cutbacks that they're being asked to make, I think there should be an accompanying statement of a risk assessment in order to avoid the consequences that, or the worst consequences that might arise out of that. I mean, Mr. Smith, head of such and such, could say, well, look, I've got £100,000 worth of savings here. I've identified these as potential risks as a result of making those savings, and in order to mitigate those risks, this is what we've been doing. I mean, you make the point for me, Graham, that it's a big chunk of cash. It's something, it could well have consequences, and I think we as an audit committee are here to provide or at least help provide the framework in which those sort of risks can be managed. As I say, it's not. It's going to go ahead, and it's going to go ahead. We all accept that. We all understand that, but there are clearly risks that come with it, and I think there should be a framework set up to manage those risks in order that they can be explained and mitigated. Thanks.
Chairman, may I just comment as well? And I do agree with all of that's been discussed as well. I think just the other thing for councillors' benefit, when we asked our service heads to put forward their proposals, they put forward more than £700,000 worth. So as part of our initial sifting, if you like, our initial risk assessment, we didn't do certain things as well. So, but I think, Councillor is quite right that actually it's your role to have an oversight that we're applying risk appropriately. So there's certainly something that we can do around making sure we present that back in the right way, but not just with the 700,000 as we've discussed, but with the property target, with the business transformation target, which has quite a lot of risk inbuilt to it as well. In fact, with everything we're doing over the next couple of years, in fact, because in the following year's budget, we need to find another 1.3 or 1.4 million, and then some more after that. So actually the whole point about risk awareness and risk assessment, yes, we've started doing that, we are doing that, and we need to make sure that you're cited on that too.
I do share Councillor Deer's concerns about us making the savings which we have aspired to in our business plan for next year. And following up, Tom, your comments about the different areas where we are intending to make the savings, I wonder whether it's the audit committee's job or whether it's the VFM's job to monitor progress against those planned savings. Your opinion as to, should it be us or should it be VFM? And these things straddle, and I'm not sure which would be the clearer place to have the monitoring and control from the members.
Well, it's actually the executive's role to stay on track. It's their
But we track the we should be monitoring the executive to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yes, so the value for money ONS will keep an oversight on the executives staying on track during the year. I think where the audit committee comes in is the governance around the whole value for money piece that Mark was talking about, and that does include the management of risks that are in our budget. And I think that's the angle that I'd suggest the audit committee take, just to avoid duplicating anybody else. So you're not a scrutiny committee as such, and we already have those. So you're not scrutinising the function of the executive, but you are looking at risks to the council across the piece, including the risks of not sticking to our budget and ending up at the end of the year with a big overspend that we need to fund and divert resources away from something else. So I think that's where we can come in. I mean, we can pick this up a little bit more under annual governance statement later on, Chairman, if you like. And certainly when Peter brings in this the next risk discussion, we can perhaps have this as a focus item there, because of the heightened risk profile within our budget in tough financial times.
To item 8, accounting policies, and I think Vicky is going to talk us through this.
Sorry, Chairman, I'll be doing that. So the accounting policies literally are the laying out of the assumptions and the statutory, well, they're not actually statutory, the accounting standards that we will be following to produce this set of accounts that we're about to go through, and also looking forward into the implications for next year's financial accounting. So there's two aspects to it. There's the current statement of accounts, which is 1920, and we're saying that there isn't any changes in the statements that have come through that we need to be applying to these standards. This audit committee approved the accounting policies before, about, it must have been the March committee last year, because we always do it the year before the financial year begins. And the statement also looks ahead at what's going to be changing in next financial year around our accounting assumptions. So we can see in the report that the change for us is IFRS 16, which is all about lease accounting. The work's underway at the moment to assess the impact. It's quite a deep and far-reaching policy this time round about some embedded leases, implied leases. Very technical paper. So there's a fair bit of work already being done across the financial piece that we work on to understand where these leases may exist within our contractual arrangements. So that will eventually turn up in next year's accounts, and there'll be a statement in this year's accounts about the impact resulting from the work once we've completed it. So those literally are the changes. Well, that is the change that's happening. There isn't any other change to report. So it's just for the committee to note. Happy to discuss further, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. I found this a little difficult to understand. I mean, for example, when you say the impact, short-term leases are exempt, what's the definition of short-term? Most leases have break clauses in them, so aren't they by definition short-term?
So short-term under the standard is a year. Anything under a year is considered a short-term lease. Effectively, it's operational. But they don't use that kind of terminology in the new lease arrangements.
And then the peppercorn leases, this is just a method for valuing the buildings and using the lease details as a valuation tool.
So the standard's quite deep in respect of what it's doing is it's looking for what you might consider to be off-balance sheet financing. So where you have a lease on a peppercorn, there could be some arrangement of significant value sitting behind that that just isn't recognised in the statements. So that this is really the angle that leases the IFRS is coming at. It's trying to get into the detail of just what are the assets and what are the financial arrangements behind the contracts that we operate. But on the surface of something like, for example, the refuse contract, there are a good dozen or so freighters involved in that contract, running at several £1 million of value. The question is, are we leasing those freighters as an authority, or have we got a contract with Biffa to empty the bins? So this standard gets into a lot of detail in that respect. And I'll not give the answer to that just yet, because we'll get those in the accounts.
Thank you, Chairman. In the impact column on page 62, so that there's a table there, it says, it makes an assertion that the council has a well-maintained complete lease register. So as good questioning auditors, can I ask what verification of this assertion will be made during the year? Perhaps it's something that external audit might look at. I don't know, but we're presented with an assertion. It's quite a strong assertion, and I think as auditors it's probably worthwhile just questioning, will an external opinion be gathered on this? Thank you, Chairman.
That the work being done by Peter and his team around IFRS 16, that is something we will be looking at as part of the interim audit. So we won't be giving an opinion on that. We will be reporting back in terms of what arrangements, how robust we think the council's arrangements are in preparation for IFRS 16.
Thank you, Chairman. It may be beyond the scope of this meeting, but as someone who's tried to read the Pricewaterhouse, Ernst & Young, whatever, handouts on IFRS 16, is there a Reader's Digest version of the very basic principles that we might hear from anyone in the room? I mean, I'm familiar with the concept of leases and lessors because I'm in property, and that's, you know, it's a big part of commercial property anyway, which is a big part of what goes on. So I'm familiar with the valuation of leases and all that sort of thing. But my understanding was Waverley is largely a lessor of property. Yeah, as I say, I'm having tried to read the trade information on this, I have to say I came up a bit blank. So if there is any information that could be sufficiently dumbed down for me to be able to understand it now, that would be much appreciated.
We've got a couple of slides that we've used in some updates that I'd be happy to share via finance team colleagues.
It would help us understand the scale of the effect it will have on the environment.
Yeah, it does try and like summarise it in terms of like 1 or 2 pages in terms of like the key impacts. Yeah, I can get that sent through.
Minor points perhaps on property valuation. This is a subject about which I know nothing at all. But the rules for accounting, and I could have asked this question on the last item as well, the rules which are used to value property, are they completely definitive as laid down to us? Are there any options in that, or do we have to value the property in only one way? I noted that the external auditor's job is to make sure we've done it properly, but do we just pick that up from the regulations and that's it?
So, as I'm sure Simon, Council Deer would adhere to this, that valuation is a bit of a dark art, but in terms of property, it is the RICS valuation guides that we use. So it's the Chartered Institute of Valuation. I can't remember what RICS stands for exactly, but that Chartered Surveyors, sorry. That's the guidance that we adhere to, and that's what the auditors also follow when it comes to looking at how we compiled our valuations.
Right, yes, always forget. It is recommended the Audit Committee notes the proposed changes in accounting policy. That agreed?
Yeah,
Thank you.
fine.
Item 9, Annual Governance Statement, consideration of potential governance issues. Right, I think, Peter, you will present this item.
Thank you, Chairman. So the annual governance statement is the overarching document that sits above our financial statement. So it gets approved alongside the statements in July when they get signed off by the committee. The governance statement actually walks the organisation through all the checks and balances that we have at strategic level to make sure that our business is compliant with the laws and regulations, standards and policies that we have in place, our own constitution. It's a well-structured document, so it follows a SIPFA template. So the content of SIPFA templates in this document, although it doesn't follow it exactly in terms of the SIPFA's headings. It's structured so that you can just follow it through. So it describes, first of all, the standards regulation regime that sits behind this. It then talks about what the corporate governance actually is. Section 3 tells you that what the 7 principles are. They're fairly straightforward to read and understand. Section 4 walks us through our governance arrangements, how we know our arrangements are working. So it's fairly short prose. We don't have pages and pages of this. It's all bullet pointed. I'm sure you'll recognise these things when you read them. Section 5 describes how the council works, so it's also to do with how the members operate within this council, within the constitution, and the different committees that operate. Section 5.1 talks about changes in governance during the year. You can see there we're saying there was a change in terms of corporate strategy, so we adopted a new strategy in September 19, which is during this financial year. And then 5.2, resolution of significant governance issues. This is something that we discuss at every audit committee, if you recall. We have a verbal update on where members of the committee feel that there may be governance issues to be discussed. And this all culminates in this particular part of the document here, so where we say there are some challenges and to our governance. You can see that in October 18 there's the discussion about the High Court challenges to our local plan, and at one point there was also the air quality that has been discussed this evening as well, part of the challenge to our governance. Section 5.3 talks about significant operational events that have gone on during the year. So you can see there's the capital strategy has been adjusted to reflect our change in emphasis in the commercial property market. So there's some detail there to enable members to understand what's going on. Our risk management, so we've referred to the work that we've done on risk management in-house with the members and our risk appetite. 5.4 then covers off other governance issues arising during the year. We're saying that there actually aren't any being identified during the course of this year. Section 6 lays out the work of this audit committee, so anyone reading the financial statements and reading the annual governance statement can understand how this committee operates to ensure governance is effective at Waverley. Section 7 talks you through management of key risks, which we've touched on several times tonight. Managing the risk of fraud, so there's a short bit there about how that's dealt with. Anti-fraud and corruption statement. Responsibilities of the Section 151, which is Chief Finance Officer in this authority. Our internal and external audit arrangements, and then there's the signing off by the leader after a statement of certification. So I suppose the thing to do now is to consider this report as it stands, whether it does truly reflect, from the committee's perspective, the governance arrangements and everything during the committee's life cycle so far has come across that you may consider needs to be reflected in this document. The document will be finalised in July alongside the statement of accounts, so there is time to make adjustment to this document. It's only in draft at the moment.
To what extent is this different from the governance statements which we saw last year? Or is this exactly the same?
So the layout's the same. We haven't adjusted the layout and format of the document. The changes that have come in are in section 5, where there's some discussions of what's gone on operationally within the authorities during the course of this year. So we don't do it as a track document in this particular track changes. So because this is purely about what's gone on in this financial year, it's not a policy document. It's a live document that's reflecting the last financial year.
So to sum, essentially it's section 5 which has changed, because it all looks very familiar to what we would have all seen 8 months ago.
And it's fair enough, and the document should look familiar to you because it is one of the same document. It's just the content in areas will change around what's gone on operationally in this authority, and also any changes in the constitution. So it's a case of reading the document, just reflecting whether you think that's a fair assessment. It's a bit like a school report, really, for the last year.
Chair, Councillor Hyman did register to speak on this item.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Thank you, Chairman. If I can refer you to page 68, if I may, members. I must say, first of all, actually, that the annual government statement, I know that Councillor Seaborn and myself are both on the committee previously, and we and others spent quite a lot of time, far too much detailitis into the wording of these things, but a lot of good work by Vicky and by Gail particularly. We were probably more hindrance than help, to be honest, as members, but we do now have some very good, very well written documents. My concern with although it's been said that this is all about the 2019-20 year, if you look at paragraph 5.2, we're on the right-hand side of page 68, that is about in relation to statutory challenges from the previous year. And, of course, there was one far bigger issue than there that isn't in here, and I've mentioned it before, and it was the People over Wind and Sweetman judgment. And there was a moratorium in that year, put in place in May 2018. And I'm just extremely surprised that something which is the highest law in the land, above mere policy, like the LPP1, is not mentioned in here. And, of course, you know, also its impact on the borough, the impact of compliance on the borough, where it would be very good for residents, limiting housing development and putting power in the hands of councillors. Obviously, that's not popular with the higher authorities, government and whatever. And also the amount of money that we've lost on appeals and had to pay in appeal costs, and just the cost of our staff and dealing with appeals, which would not happen if we were implementing the legislation properly, which the council agreed to do in May, but then upon advice from people who were following the strategy that Sweetman judgment found unlawful, that advice has put us back in the position where we are now, and I don't think this can continue. So I really do think that, you know, we have to have such serious issues mentioned in our annual governance statement. On page 71, you'll see at paragraph 9, it refers to our standards. It says the Council's committed to the highest possible standards of honesty, openness and accountability. What my major concern here, of course, on page 72, over the top of the page, this is a letter which must be signed by the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council. It says at the beginning of the first paragraph on page 72 that the Chief Financial Officer considers the system of internal control works effectively. No matters of significance have been omitted from this statement. Well, when there are significant issues with many years of evidence which simply, you know, I don't think we can expect our Chief Executive Officer and the Leader of the Council to sign that off when we know there are extremely significant issues, the two elephants in the room of selling imaginary mitigation and of the air quality officer having highlighted the falsification of the transport assessment, upon which the neighbourhood plan, the local plan, everything is air quality action plan. It's all based upon that falsified transport assessment from 2008. These have to be resolved, you know, I really think that this committee must take note of that. It's we have to hold each other to account in accordance with the new Nolan principles, and we have to be honest. I have to come here and say this. It's my duty to do so. I'm not happy that it's happening, and I don't like being like a broken record. I wish that other people would simply just take this seriously and take it forward, and if you don't, then I have a number of residents who will be taking action with me on this. So please, take note, sort this out, and don't allow this annual governance statement to go through with the elephants in the room not being addressed. I expect action this week from this committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. I know some aspects of this have already been covered. I think, Tom, you've written on the mitigation issue. Could you make a comment on this, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So as Mr Vickers indicated, this is here as a draft for you, and if you as a committee wished us to add other things, then clearly we'd go and do that, and we'd look at how to do that. On the issues that Councillor Hyman mentions, on the air quality issue, we have featured that in previous years' annual governance statements. I've specifically put that in over the last two, and I would be wanting to put that in here. On the issues of Sweetman, etc., again, depending on what the committee wishes us to do, we'll go away and look at adding that too. Clearly quite a lot of work did go into that over the last 2 years, and that led us to a conclusion and advice about the lawfulness of what the council does in terms of determining planning applications, etc. And so we would obviously reflect the advice that we've got, the briefings that we've given to councillors within any text here. And obviously we'd check any text with our legal advisors as well before publication.
I have a number of items which I'd like to bring to the committee's attention, partly in this same field, and it's to do with planning issues. The presentation we had before Christmas from Stephen Whale, which discussed the habitat regulations, biodiversity and environmental impact issues. It's very clear from his presentation that we need and we're obligated to provide written assessment reports in each of those areas. And as far as I'm aware, that hasn't been done. The planning committees do not receive reports. They do not receive any indication that it's been even considered. What I would like to suggest is that we have a sort of a tick box approach to start with. I've checked with Zach Elwood on whether he's happy with this approach, where we list what we should be doing in terms of the reporting, whether it's being considered by the planning committee. And it's up to the committee to decide whether there's an issue or not, but it needs to be shown to be addressed, is my view. Are there any comments for members on that?
I totally agree. I think that a lot of the reports that we see on the planning committees are incomplete, not only from that point of view, from Natural England, but also some of the highway ones give the impression that they haven't actually been there. So I think that is a very good idea.
Chairman, I think, as Tom said, one of the reasons why we have the governance discussion at this committee is for members to raise things and for them to be considered by officers. It's good that you've already spoken to the head of planning and economic development. So, I'm hearing from what you're saying that he was sort of quite receptive to that idea. So, I can take that on with Zach and sort of relay the conversation with him. I know he's only been here a couple of months, but he is looking to work with chairman and other members of committees to improve the presentation and the coverage of planning reports. So I think all member input is good. I think in the context of good governance, which is what we're talking about here, I think if there's some good practice that members, whether they're on planning committees or not, think would support decision making and better governance, better transparency, well, let's talk to the head of service, the relevant head of service, in this case Zach, and see what we can do. So I'll take that on board, Chairman, and talk to Zach about that.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, a second area, I suppose it's to do with the governance of the project management, and I'm thinking particularly of the Memorial Hall overspend. And I think when we discussed this briefly a few days back, you did say there had been an assessment done, a lessons learned report. And I think I, for one, would like to see what that lessons learned, what's in there, how did it come about, what were the issues in the overspend in the first place? It's because, is that something the committee would like to see more details on?
Well, I certainly would like to see some more of that. Yeah. We have some interesting and quite expensive projects as a borough, and I'm new on the councils, but my sense is that we don't seem to share openly what has happened, either positively or negatively, from our investments and our other projects. And this goes back to what I was alluding to earlier on with business transformation projects. My experience from my own experience from business is they're bloody difficult to do, and they're bloody difficult to achieve. So, keeping track of them and being aware of what's going on and our achievements, particularly, business transformation projects, for example, going back to that, are several minor projects. They're not one great big thing. Are we learning lessons from each of the changes which we're trying to put into place? Going back to the capital project on the Memorial Hall, there's a huge amount of money gone in there. It still seems to be going on and on and on. It seems to be a black hole to me. But perhaps I'm missing some of the detail. And I certainly feel that we ought to be learning, we ought to be seeing more of it as an audit committee to assure ourselves that we are taking the lessons learned.
Yes, sorry.
It would be very helpful. I mean, I think the idea is a good one, but I don't know where the sort of oversight and scrutiny begins and where we end. So much as I'd like to see it, is that for us to do, or should be done elsewhere?
I think, from my point of view, it's the process that's been undertaken. It's simply that. It's just how did we come into that situation and what was done to learn the lessons from that. The item that was raised at the last full council meeting, where the audit committee should have some input into the investment strategy. Now, I don't know what that entails and what would be sensible in that topic. So I don't know whether, Graham, you have any ideas on how to pursue that.
Yep, so 2 weeks ago the council agreed a new, revised property strategy, so I think it would be quite timely for the Audit Committee to look at the governance and decision-making around that, and certainly linking onto Mark's Grant Thornton report around that risk. I think it would build nicely on top of that, actually, because whilst I think, Mark, you were saying, you don't sort of get into that in a huge amount of detail, you want to look at our arrangements. I think it's absolutely appropriate for the Audit Committee to look at the arrangements that Waverley have in place for implementing that strategy. Now, the strategy will probably take the form of acquisitions and development over the years. And so even though we haven't acquired anything for a year and a half, we will need to in order to meet the income target. So we can bring something back to the committee around specifically the decisions and the governance around that strategy, and we can have quite an open discussion. Now, one thing we've done in the past, Chairman, with the committee is we've had offline discussions with committee members. I think that's worked well, and then sort of brought a summary of that back into the committee so that in a public meeting members can talk about that, but you do the detail offline, particularly sometimes on the more complex areas that can take some time, and members can really drill into the details. So we can do either. It depends whether you want a sort of a workshop detailed scrutiny or analysis actually at a meeting, or do that offline and then bring that back with some recommendations, be they to the executive or a scrutiny committee from the audit committee, and you take that at the actual meeting itself. I'll leave that for you and your members to decide, Chairman. But absolutely, I think it's a big area of work that is likely to pick up in pace and get some activity running very soon. So let's have a look right at the start at the governance and decision making around it.
Thank you, Graham. Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. I mean, I sort of recall from the capital strategy, would it be that there is quite a comprehensive piece of work on the framework by which investment in commercial property is judged. One would hesitate to say that nothing can ever be improved upon, but it seemed to me a reasonably comprehensive set of criteria by which properties are judged, assessed, and everything else. What I think we should avoid doing on the audit committee is taking any part in any decision-making process about individual investments. I think that would be entirely wrong. It's the sort of quis custodes ipso, who guards the guards, if you like, is really what I'm trying to say. And I think this committee shouldn't be involved in any value judgment on any particular proposition that the council's considering. And as I say, the structure I've seen is fair enough, but who's to say it can't be improved on? I think it would only be improved on at the margin, I have to say, but that may be something worth considering. Thanks.
Assuming we're moving on to other things to include it, right. So, two issues. Firstly, Peter mentioned that we've had the air quality problems mentioned. I don't find them in the report anywhere. It seems to me that we have resolution of significant governance issues in 2018-19. Well, I guess this has been dragging on for a couple of years, but actually this is the year. This is the year when the resolution came out. There are some lessons learned. It is governance. I feel it should be stated, Chairman. So I'd like to see, just a statement of what has happened. It's been thoroughly investigated. We should be proud about the lessons we've learned from it, and we should just let people know that we've done due diligence around it, because it has been very much shrouded in secrecy of necessity previously, and now it's out. So that was one item. The other item, significant operational events. I mean, this is going to impact on governance. We declared a climate emergency in September. It appears in all our papers now. So, we're required to conduct our business with that in mind. That is governance in itself. So I think it should be stated as a a significant operational event, and we're going to go forward very shortly with a strategy and a plan. That'll be something, a highlight for next year. But just declaring the emergency, I think, is a governance event in itself, or an operational event in itself, which I think we ought to capture. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, if I may, Chairman, just to completely endorse and agree with that, certainly we need to do that. Yeah.
The committee is invited to raise any potential emerging governance issues for consideration. That's what we've done, so we agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, next item 10, internal audit plan progress. I think Gail will be presenting this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, presented before you is the progress on the plan. And as you will see, has been quite a difficult year, unfortunately having had limited in-house resource, so therefore that's resulted in me having to provide more audit days to the contractor, as in paragraph 4.2. As you can see, I've procured from them 141 days. If we go to the Annex 1, I won't go through it in so much detail because I'm sure members will wish to comment. As you can see, the work has been completed. Most of the work is in progress. 65 has been completed, and when I say 65% is completed, that's where I've actually had the reports from the Southern Internal Audit Partnership, who are our contractor. On table 4, you can actually see those that have been completed and the progress for the rolling work programme is in paragraph 6. As you can see, the progress that is being made regarding those reviews. Some of those have, in actual fact, I've received a draft report since this report, producing this report. So there are a few of those that have actually progressed even further because obviously the contractors have been in getting on with the work. You will see on page 86, there is a review in there. I know there's been quite a lot of talk tonight about air quality. This is a review that I'll be doing, ensuring that the points that have come out of the air quality report have been addressed and given the committee assurance that the outcomes that were identified have in actual fact been addressed and are now in place. There was a few things off the top of my head regarding the head of service has mentioned regarding the contractors, the split, and how there is validation and quality assurance. And basically, I'm then going to do a review to ensure that is present and how it's been reported and where it's been reported, etc. And I'm open to comments from members on. One other area I wanted just to point out. On paragraph 7, adjustments to the audit plan. As you can see, within the plan, there is some reviews I've asked for deferment, and that is because there has been other work that's become bigger priority, and therefore there was 79 days I took out the plan, but there was an extra 92 days that were actually added into the plan to resource the reviews that needed to be completed. And I'm open to questions from members.
Thank you, Gail. Could I ask Councillor Hyman to speak?
Thank you. So I couldn't remember whether I had indicated on this or not. I was just going to refer to pages 86 and 87, Chairman, which Gail has already referred to. One, the report on air quality that's going to be coming forward. By the end of this financial year, I think you have to fit this in, don't you? That's correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I currently have it in progress.
Great. And on page 87, just under halfway down, is management of major construction projects, lessons learned from the Brightwells and Memorial Hall. That again, I would assume you're working on at the moment. I'm just wondering to what extent you're inviting input and to how wide they are. For instance, there were issues with the Memorial Hall where planning consents for moving the changing rooms out of the Memorial Hall to buildings on the sideline, temporary buildings, and that temporary things are coming back. These are repeating. A lot of this stuff isn't actually over. And there were problems with those because those planning consents weren't going to go forward to committee, or the planning applications weren't, and the residents have to fight for it. We've got, with lessons from Brightwells, we've got a planning application live at the moment, which obviously some people won't want to comment upon, but it is for making the temporary car park or swimming pool, whichever way you look at it, down at Riverside, a permanent consent, and that will require EIA, and that will require that we have a complete EIA. So there's lots of issues here which are actually ongoing, and so I'm wondering, how do we handle those issues, and how do we have input so that we're satisfied that you know, the issues that are going on, that you're aware of them, and that they get covered. Thank you, Chairman.
If I can just confirm, this particular review is going to be looking at the process we completed regarding our project management of these particular schemes and the lessons we can learn from that, because we have put in senior staff have had training on the project management process, and this review is actually going to be looking at projects that have been completed since Memorial Hall, and to see that project management experience and knowledge has now been embedded. Unfortunately, it will not be going to the depths that you have indicated with regarding planning, etc.
Thank you, Gail. Are there any other comments or questions for Gail on this item?
Thanks, Chairman. Reference page 81, there's this figure there, and on the performance dashboard, on the right-hand side, we've got percentage positive customer feedback, and then underneath the arrow, it says none received. So one point of clarification, is none received, no positive feedback received, or is it no feedback received? If it's no positive feedback, then we've got an issue. And actually, if we've had no feedback at all, we've also got an issue because we're not actually getting any feedback, and you clearly want to solicit it. So perhaps you'd like to comment on that. And then just the other point was on page 87, you've got 129 days as of in February delivered against the plan of 204 days. You've pointed out that we've got some issues with staffing on this. Does this mean we're going to fall significantly short of target for the year? Because you've basically got to deliver quite a significant percentage in the last month of the financial year to meet the target. Thank you.
I'll add the one regarding the feedback. In conjunction with the contractor, we are going to be doing an annual questionnaire to those that have had a review done in the year. That hasn't been done. But on top of that, when I send out a final report to the heads of service to inform them that it's now going on to our monitoring system, I do ask them to fill in a customer satisfaction questionnaire. So the answer to your question with regarding the feedback from heads of service, what I can say, this year I haven't had any back, but at the end of this financial year, we will be doing an annual questionnaire to establish. Bearing in mind, that is quite unusual because normally heads of service, not all feedback, but a few do feedback. And this is a new format that we've started to use this financial year because it was a new format of a report that I've obviously put in to members to make it much more open and transparent as to what feedback we do get. But in general, if heads of service had a concern regarding the audits that they were getting, I would expect heads heads of service to come to me to tell them they're not happy with the quality. The second point regarding the audit plan days, yes, there is quite a few days still to achieve, but that is the majority of those days will be supplied by the Southern Internal Audit Partnership, who, for all of these reviews, as you can see, they've actually started them, and it's just the fact of actually getting the heads, not just the heads of service, but the reviews actually completed within the time frame. Because when it comes to an internal audit, or any audit, obviously external will be able to confirm this, sometimes there is transactions you want to take a whole year, so you have to sometimes wait to the end of the full year to actually then check those transactions. So it isn't always going to be that everything's going to be done by the 31st of March. And I'm sure previous audit committees, obviously, we've obviously had that same, there's always reviews that fall over the financial years. But the point being is the days that we will be provided will be the days that we've procured from the supplier. Thank you.
Just a quick question. If you go to page 84, vending machines, you've got priorities far right, medium 7, high 5. Could you just explain that? I must be being a bit thick, because I know the numbers add up, but I don't quite know what that means.
Sorry, I couldn't see it there because it was at the top of the line there. With that, there was a total of 13 recommendations, and of those 13, 6 of those were high. And therefore, you have only got reported there, there's one being completed, so that's in the completed column, and then you've got the other, which was a high one. So therefore, you've only got the 7 that are medium, and then the 5 remaining high that haven't yet been implemented by the target date.
And is there a plan for when they will be implemented by?
Yes, well, that will actually come in the outstanding recommendations report, which is later on in my papers, where the head of service had a target date of, I think it was the 29th of February, but I know that progress is being made to get those implemented, but he hasn't asked for an extension because he wants, or that has to be implemented by the end of March. That's his target, his revised target date, but he's not asking for an extension.
Thank you, Gail. Any other comments for Gail? Any questions? No. Thank you very much. We have a recommendation. It is recommended that the Audit Committee notes the contents of the Internal Audit Plan Progress Report as attached. Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 11. Proposed Internal Audit Plan for 2020-21. Again, Gail, to introduce this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is the proposed plan for the coming year. The process of identifying the areas that will be included in the plan is the work that I do as part of the risk assessment within Waverley, but also in conjunction with the heads of service, communicating with them and discussing issues that they may have themselves. And this is a result of those discussions. What members will note is from the previous report, there were a few reviews that had actually deferred. So those reviews that have been deferred have also been included in next year's plan. And what I have done, I have included safeguarding, ensuring that that process is being correctly applied, and health and safety has been included, ensuring there's consistency applied, not just with our council house properties, but also any other property, our own buildings, is being applied consistently. And there was, I'm just flicking through. And what I have done this year, because we are going through, well, we're always going through change. I've actually left the flexibility for us to have taken on board Graham's comment regarding the committee identifying areas that they want to be would like to be added to the audit plan. So there are days that the days are flexible so that we can actually react to areas that need to be looked at, rather than setting too many days in and not being able to achieve those within the resources that we have. Oh, if I can just mention, sorry, on page 103, earlier on we did mention about property investment, where we haven't actually carried out any property investments in 1.5 years, I think was the figure Graham mentioned. And we did have a review in that from this year, which we deferred to the coming year. But because we haven't made any acquisitions, the proposal is actually looking at replacing that with the compliance with monitoring for our own council buildings. And this is actually due to a new SIPVA guide that has come to light. And we feel it's important to make sure that we've actually got things set accordingly so that we're going to be complying with that guidance. And I think that was all I really wanted to point out to members. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Quick question, actually. I counted about 8 deferred from 2019-20. It'd be interesting, when you decided which of these areas are going to defer, I'm assuming some sort of mini risk assessment or a larger risk assessment took place, and that the impact of that deferment was taken into consideration.
Yes, exactly so. You'll note, and this I'm sitting on page 101, where you have payroll was deferred. Now, in this financial year, 2019-20, we had a payroll accuracy report done, and I felt that was sufficient to give assurance to management in this financial year. But obviously, that was just covering certain elements, and therefore that's why the review is still back in for this coming year. And again, even like main accounting, in this financial year, we did include reconciliations of key financial systems, which is obviously very fundamental to our main accounting systems. And therefore, I felt, again, that was another one, carrying out my risk assessment, that was one that I could defer until the coming year.
Thank you, Chairman. So earlier on, we had the air quality discussion, the report, and I suggested that it would be useful to this committee to get some assurance that the lessons from that in the external audit report had been spread rather more widely than just to the environmental team. So Graham was suggesting that an internal audit report checking to see whether all the service areas are aware of the findings and to what extent activities, external reporting activities under their control have been reviewed against those recommendations. So I welcome the comment of colleagues on this, but I certainly would like to see something along those lines included in the plan, because I just think that's maximising the benefit that we got from a very good external audit exercise. That was point one. And then the other point, probably rather more substantial in terms of approving a report, is that there isn't a statement of the number of days to be used up this year. That there was in last year's audit report when it proposed audit plan when it came to us. I find it impossible to approve an audit plan when we have a list of things we want to do, but no statement as to how it will actually match against the available resource. So if you might want to comment on that, please, Gail. Thank you.
Point noted regarding air quality. Graham and I will discuss the way forward on that one. The other issue regarding the number of days, I do put in the number of days, but generally only when we've agreed the draft. But taking your point, generally we don't procure anything less than 230 days a year from the contractor. Or sorry, that's 230 days for the audit plan. So therefore we don't at this point in time, I haven't allocated those days to each of the audit reviews. So until the audit committee have agreed the audit plan, and on the next audit committee, I'll then provide the allocated days, which will give a full picture of the audit resources I'm applying to each of the reviews.
So we're being asked to approve something without actually knowing our ability to deliver it. I don't have a problem with agreeing in principle to the work programme that you're specifying, with the assurance that you're going to come back to us and assure that the resource is actually there to deliver it. But as things stand, it's short of where the equivalent document was last year. I went back and checked; that had a number in it. So approving a number is, to which there's a cost associated as well, I think should be part of the approval process.
What I can confirm, the audit plan will be delivered within the budget that has been allocated, which hasn't reduced from last year. The minimum number of days, or the number of days that we set for the audit plan, is a total of 230 days. And then it gets split down to each of the different reviews. So therefore, it's within budget, 230 days, and then it gets allocated accordingly.
I must say, I do share your concern, Councillor Seymour. No problems with the overall plan, but it would be very helpful if there was an estimation as to what are going to be the resources needed to complete each of the sub-projects within that plan. It makes it much easier to decide whether we want to drop something or not, depending on what we assess to be the value to our organisation.
Chairman, can I suggest that following this meeting, Gail will review the comments, liaise with the external audit contractor, and then come up with a sort of a costed plan in days, and then rather than wait for July's meeting, we just circulate that to members of the committee. And I think if members have got any comments or concerns at that stage, well, we can either address it via email, or if members had any real concerns, then we can have a special meeting if you wanted to. But it probably wouldn't be necessary, but that would probably give you the comfort you need once Gail's gone off and discussed the scope of these and the resources needed with the contractor, and then we'll put that back into circulation if that's okay. Yeah. Thank you.
The risk of repeating myself, the point I made earlier about the risks associated with the cost cutting the implementation that's going on at the council. Is this the right arena? Is this the right place, if you like, to add a line along to cover the assessment of the consequences and the mitigation of the consequences of the reductions in expenditure?
Yes, I think it is, Chairman. Yeah, we'll roll that in. Whether we choose to do that internally under Gail's oversight or whether we put it out to contractor or not, we'll take a view and then perhaps put that back out to members of the committee afterwards, see if you agree with us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any more questions? No. Okay, thank you very much. There is a recommendation. It is recommended that the Audit Committee comments and approves the proposed internal audit plan for 2020-21 as attached in Annex 1. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Moving on, item 12, progress on the implementation of internal audit recommendations. Again, Gail, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, in this, the report gives an overview of those recommendations that are overdue or due within the end of the month after the Audit Committee, which should be the 31st of March 2020. And as Councillor Floyd Douglas had mentioned earlier regarding the vending machine, this is where these recommendations are shown. And as the Head of Service has taken on board to implement and address these recommendations. And what I can say is even since this report has been produced, he has made significant improvement in implementing these recommendations, and hence the reason why he hasn't asked for an extension in Annex 2 to this paper. In the other recommendations that are shown as outstanding under separate heads of service, we have the Head of Finance, where the recommendation is not due until the 30th of March, and therefore these recommendations will be addressed by the time frame. And again, with the recommendation for the Head of Housing, also will be addressed by the target date of the 31st of March, 2020.
Thank you, Gail. So you said there are no issues really to consider at this time?
Yes, that's correct. The heads of service have got these, as I say, they are due to be implemented by the end of March, and they've got them under their auspice and control, and making sure that they're implemented by the time frame. As I say, the only one that I was concerned about was the one for the 29th of February, but the tight time frame that I provided to the head of business transformation actually is been actioned.
Thank you. Any questions, comments from members? None. Thank you very much. Recommendation. It is recommended that the committee considers the information contained in Annex 1 and following discussion at the Audit Committee meeting identifies any action it wishes to be taken. Is that agreed? And then the second recommendation, that the committee considers the head of service's justification for a change in the due date for the recommendations listed in Annex 2 and agree an appropriate implementation. Have we discussed that aspect?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, there was none.
There was none?
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
No need to agree that one then. Okay, moving on to item 13 is the fraud investigation. And again, Gail, could you introduce this one, please?
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the review, the paper that relates to the fraud work that we've been doing. This relates not just to the housing tenancy fraud work, but any other fraud areas that are identified. And we now report this as a whole in this report. And you can see on Annex 1, where properties have been recovered in relation to social housing tenancy fraud areas, and you can see where we've also been dealing with disabled facilities grant, where we 55,000, but we've also been working on the NFI exercise work, which has identified at the moment 258,000. And basically, any comments from members on the work being completed by the Fraud Investigation Officer?
The values in the table, the values of the financial value, I may have asked this question before. Does this in any way appear on our balance sheet? I know some of these sums, of course, are not numbers that necessarily we've paid. I mean, things like housing benefit, presumably. But is there any value of this which does appear on our balance sheet?
No, these values don't appear on our balance sheet. These are Cabinet Office figures, where they're indicative figures that they set, and that's why we use the Cabinet Office figures, because it enables us to carry out any comparisons with other authorities that are carrying out similar work. So if we were actually using different figures, obviously it would be much more difficult to actually have a comparison.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? None. Thank you very much. Therefore, recommendation, it is recommended that the Audit Committee notes the results of the fraud investigation activity attached in Annex 1 up to and including Quarter 3, covering the period 1st of April 2019 to 31st of December 2019. Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, final item 14 is the recurrent work programme. Are there any comments or people wishing to speak on this item? None? None? Please.
Just one small point, Mr. Chair. We've got 2 items down for the July meeting for external audit, one being our external audit findings report, but also the annual governance report. I think the annual governance, I think that's a duplication in effect. I think the annual governance report is the old term for the audit findings report.
Do you have a comment, Graham, on that? So no other comments on this item. Therefore, recommendation, the Audit Committee is invited to note its recurrent annual work programme. Agreed? Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that... No. What have we got? What have we got?
Any other issues?
Let's get back to this. No other items, so we declare the meeting closed then. Thank you very much indeed. Thought there was another item too.
Yeah, well, I thought...